Shalom, friends. This week's Torah portion is called Bisselle, and it deals with the ultimate and final departure of the Israelites from Egypt. The unrelenting grip of the tyrant Pharaoh on the throat of the Jews was finally loosened enough for them to escape into the desert, beyond the Yam Suf, beyond the Red Sea, and into the vast wilderness of freedom for the first time. But there was a problem, of course. They brought enough food with them to eat, which is how and why we observe the Passover Seder, but it certainly wasn't enough to preserve them through 40 years of wandering through the wilderness of Sinai. We find later on in the chapter 16, verse 4, that Moses tells the people that God gave them lechem min hashamayim, bread from heaven, heavenly bread. That's what we call man, or in English we call it manna. The man was the rain from heaven that landed on the ground every single day and sustained the Jewish people throughout the long years of their walk through the desert. It was enough to fill them. It was enough to sustain them. And why did God do this? God did this because otherwise they would not have survived 40 years or even 40 days in the desert. They needed this in order to make sure that they survived and ultimately made it into the land of Eretz Yisrael. The Gerah Rebbe, who's also called the Sfat Emet, makes this observation way back in the book of Genesis, where three angels come to meet Abraham and Sarah and bring a message of an impending birth that neither of them had suspected. Abraham and Sarah greeted and took in the three strangers into their tent without any question. Where did you come from? What did you do? What are you bringing for us? Why are you here? Nothing. Simply, they welcomed them into the tent, and no sooner do they come in that Abraham turns to his companion and says, Lushi ba'asi ugot. Please make for our strangers, our guests, food. And because of this, says the Gerah Rebbe, because of this, this was ultimately why God, without question, without hesitation, fed the ancestors of Abraham and Sarah, the progeny that ultimately they gave birth to, that became the more than 600,000 Jews that escaped from Egypt, manna, heavenly bread, for all of those years in the desert. So what are we to extrapolate from the story? What is the moral that the Gerah Rebbe is trying to convey to us who live so many years later? It's this. Do now, and that legacy becomes passed on to future generations. Say a bracha, light your candles, do the mitzvot that you can do. May not be everything, but do things that become a legacy that your children and your grandchildren will ultimately hold fast to. And that becomes a lasting legacy that they will give new birth to new shoots in the future that you and I will never live long enough to realize. But it's a gift of the generations. A gift that began with Abraham, went to Moses, and now lies securely in our arms. I wish you a good Shabbos and many opportunities to fulfill the legacy that has been handed down into our souls, into our hands, into our hearts. Shabbat Shalom.